All right. My master's family, and this is the master from the end of chapter 1, which was it Lloyd, right? Colonel Lloyd. So this is Colonel Lloyd. Okay. My master's family consisted of 2 sons, Andrew and Richard, 1 daughter, Lucretia, and her husband, Captain Thomas Auld. They lived in one house upon the home plantation of Colonel Edward Lloyd. My master was Colonel Lloyd's clerk and superintendent. He was what might be called the overseer of the overseers. So remember how we talked about like the slaves within themselves kind of had a caste system. There's also like a pecking order on the plantation. So you have the master, right? And then you have like the overseer of overseers. And then you had the overseer. Okay, so what did the overseer oversee? This one down here. What did they oversee? Yeah. I'm just going to write slaves here. So look how far removed the master is from actually having anything to do with the slaves. The overseer of the overseers, meaning that there are usually multiple overseers on a plantation, right? Okay. I spent 2 years of childhood on this plantation in my old master's family. It was here that I witnessed the bloody transaction recorded in the first chapter. And as I received my first impressions of slavery on this plantation, I will give some description of it and of slavery as it there existed. The plantation is about 12 miles north of Easton in Talbot County and is situated on the border of Miles River. The principal products raised upon it were tobacco, corn, and wheat. These were raised in great abundance, so that, with the products of this and other farms belonging to him, he was able to keep in almost constant employment a large sloop in carrying them to market. What's a sloop? Anybody know? How would you get all of those things? Well, listen for the question. How would you get all the things that they farmed, right? Tobacco, corn, and wheat from the south to Boston if they're right off the river? A ferry, a boat, yeah. So a sloop is like a sailboat, right? So they have to move goods from the south to, was it Baltimore? Yeah, to Baltimore. This is the reason for their location. That's why their plantation was close to the river. This sloop was named Sally Lloyd in honor of one of the colonel's daughters. My master's son-in-law, Captain Auld, was master of the vessel. Okay, so you have Lloyd is the master, and then his son-in-law, S-I-L, son-in-law, is Captain Auld, and he sailed the ship. She was otherwise manned by the colonel's own slaves. Their names were Peter, Isaac, Rich, and Jake. They were esteemed very highly by the other slaves and looked upon as privileged ones of the plantation. So remember how we said our caste system within the slaves. The one thing that we said in chapter 1 that created the caste system or the social pecking order within the slaves themselves that he mentioned was first what? Good Lord. Y'all gonna answer me?
What was the question again?
Hold on. So remember when we first started reading chapter 1, I said within this plantation, the slaves had a pecking order, right? Even though they were considered the low of the low, within themselves there was a caste system. Yes, a color. So casteism within the slaves was based on the darkness of their skin. But now we also see, right, that they were seen as the privileged ones. So the caste system within the slaves also was based on like the privileges. So also within the slaves, if you were given certain privileges, like the ability to work on this sloop, you were also seen as higher up within their own caste system, right? For it was no small affair in the eyes of slaves to be allowed to see Baltimore. Why are they so excited to see Baltimore? It is free. Yep. So they are so excited because this is like their first time to see like freedom and to see what the North lives like. So what do you think they're going to see when they go to Baltimore to help sell the goods? What are the slaves going to see in the North? Do what? Free black men and women. Yeah. Right? And if they have only, like Frederick Douglass, only been born into slavery and only known that, like that's like a totally different world to them, right? Okay. Colonel Lloyd kept from 300 to 400 slaves on his home plantation and owned a large number more on the neighboring farms belonging to him. Okay, do a couple of things. Knock out this number because I don't remember what that's in reference to. And this question, I don't think like this question like fits what we're reading, so we're going to mark that out. Okay, so also, within the pecking order of slave owners or plantation owners, you had a pecking order of that as well, right? So looking at Colonel Lloyd, he had 300 to 400 slaves and like multiple farms. What do the slaves on those plantations know about Colonel Lloyd? Like, what is their perception of him within the pecking order of masters? He has 300 to 400 slaves and multiple farms. Yeah. So that is like increases his pecking order, right? I mean, though goes society, more money, the higher pecking order. So he has more status himself, even Colonel Lloyd, right? Here too, the slaves of all other farms received their monthly allowance of food and their yearly clothing. The men and women slaves received as their monthly allowance for food, so this is every month, 8 pounds of pork or its equivalent in fish and 1 bushel of cornmeal. So for 1 month, they get 8 pounds of like meat and 1 bag of cornmeal. Y'all could probably eat that in 4 days. Their yearly clothing consisted of 2 linen shirts, 1 pair of linen trousers. Why linen? Linen now is expensive. Why linen?
Cheap back then.
Cheap and not really. Linen is like seen as like a summer material because it breathes well, right? So think about what they're doing. They are working from sun up to sundown in the fields in the heat majority of the year, right? Especially in the South, right? Winters aren't too terrible in the South, right? So 2 shirts, 1 pair of pants. That linen would last them from late spring all the way through early fall. 1 pair of pants, doing the work they do. Like the shirts, they get 1 jacket, so a linen jacket to cover. 1 pair of trousers for the winter, that's nice, made of coarse Negro cloth, which is like think of like a potato sack, like that thick, heavy, kind of itchy, right? 1 pair of stockings, socks, 1 pair of shoes, the whole of which could not have cost more than $7. So each owner spent just about $7 for clothing for their slave, for 1 slave, for a year. The allowance of the slave children was given to their mothers or the old women having the care of them. The children unable to work in the field had neither shoes, nor stockings, nor jackets, nor trousers given to them. So the children only had 2 coarse linen shirts per year. When these failed them, meaning they fell apart, they went naked until the next allowance day. So they could, with the allowance that they were given, or the women were given that were taking care of them, they could buy them clothes, right? Children from 7 to 10 years old of both sexes, almost naked, might be seen all seasons of the year. Why? Why do masters not give clothing to the children? Why do the slaves get it? Why do the adults get it?
Because they can make profit with them. Because slaves are the ones actually working.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to clothe you and spend the least amount of money that I can because you're going to bring me money, right? So the slaves obviously are seen as property, duh. But the children, can they do anything for them? They can't even work in the house at this point, right? Because they're too little. So why am I going to clothe something, which is how they saw them, when I'm not making any money off of them, right? Okay, so one of the things that I want us to see throughout is why list these details? So think about, this is in a book, right? So this is his narrative of his life. So who's going to read this book? He wrote this when he was free. He wrote this when he was in the North. So who's going to read this book? Okay, freed slaves. Do the freed slaves in the North need to know those details if they were prior slaves? No. Okay, so it's for like the audience of white Northerners, right, who don't necessarily know what it's like. And what does that do? What does that do for them? Which will eventually help them to do what? Stop it. Like this is going to help lead to like reasons for fighting the Civil War, right? One of the reasons, right? So I'm just like putting like shows the difference and encourages to like change something. And so far, and we asked this question, I think, a little later. Did I miss it? Let's go back to this question because now I think it's a little bit more relevant at the bottom of paragraph 2. So we talked about this in chapter 1 that we said like his emotion was like clinical, right? Like just like this is what it is. So why is it matter of the fact, almost aloof? Aloof is like, I don't care. Why that tone? This is not, he's not giving us an emotional retelling, right, of what happened. He's just telling us what the facts are. He isn't telling like his reaction. He's like, this is where I saw the realities of what slavery was, right? When I saw my aunt beaten. This is what it is. Here are the things. Why unemotional? Keyshawn?
Maybe it's because, like, if they go to read it, like, he's not, like, saying, like, oh, feel bad for me, but like, he's just telling me, like, straight up how it was.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it, so that so Douglas doesn't want, like, sympathy. right? What do you think he wants?
Freedom.
I mean, change, yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But also think the book itself is an argument for why slavery is bad, right? When you enter an argument, and you guys know this, and I don't mean like arguments as in like volatile, but like when you enter in an argument, if you are emotional about something, your audience is going to stop listening to you, right? Because you're being emotional. I just need the facts. And so that's literally all he's doing, is just giving those facts. All right, let's go back to paragraph 3. There were no beds given the slaves unless one coarse blanket be considered such, and none but the men and women had these. So they had no beds, just a blanket that they could fold or just sleep on the ground. This, however, is not considered a very great privation. They find less difficulty from the want of beds than from the want of time to sleep. What does that mean? Yeah, so they don't have the time to sleep. I mean, if I had time to sleep, I might care about a really good bed, but I don't even have time to sleep, so why do I worry about a bed? For when their day's work in the field is done, the most of them having their washing, mending, and cooking to do, and having few or none of the ordinary facilities to do these, what does that mean? Yeah, they don't have anywhere to they don't have like a dedicated kitchen, quote unquote kitchen, or like a washing area. Very many of their sleeping hours are consumed in preparing for the field for the coming day. So during the day, they do the work for the master, and then at night they do the work for themselves. And when this is done, all the work, right, the washing, the mending, the cooking, what are they mending? They have the same pair of clothes, the same pants, the same shirt, the same pair of socks, one pair of shoes for a whole year. So when they rip, you've got to repair them so that you can continue on, because the master doesn't care. When this is done, old and young, male and female, married and single, drop down by side on one common bed, the cold, damp floor. So that is their bed. Each covering himself or herself with their miserable blankets. And here they sleep till they are summoned to the field by the driver's horn. At the sound of this, all must rise and be off to the field. There must be no halting. Everyone must be at his or her post. And woe betides them who hear not this morning summons to the field. What does this mean? Woe betides them who hear not the summons to the field. What does that mean?
They get punished if they don't like.
Yep. For if they are not awakened by the sense of hearing, the horn, they are awakened by the sense of feeling. No age nor sex finds any favor. The feeling of what? Yep, the whip. Mr. Severe, the overseer, I mean, if that's not a good name. Used to stand by the door of the quarter, armed with a large hickory stick and heavy cowskin, ready to whip anyone who was so unfortunate as not to hear or from any other cause, was prevented from being ready to start for the field at the sound of the horn. So think about like what other causes, right? So maybe like they are sick, or they have a sick, like dealing with a sick child, right? Or they just are just so tired, so exhausted that they don't hear that. So whenever I have like these little notes right here, it's not a question, so like these are things that we need to look for, right? So Douglas begins to explore a major theme in his autobiography, slavers' dehumanization to both the slave and the slave master. So we've been seeing it with the slave. What I think is interesting is like his like perspective in recognizing the impact on the slave master. I don't think really anything, go ahead.
So they said if like they're unfortunate to hear, like how, like since there's like 300 abundant slaves, how would they know if one is gone?
Good question. Well, because think like you have overseers. So think of, there's so many of y'all in this building. How do we manage y'all? Y'all are divided up by teacher. I'm not comparing myself. Please don't go home and say I'm comparing myself to an overseer. That is not, I mean, sometimes I feel that way with y'all. But that's like, right? So like an overseer, so you had the overseer, so that's what he was saying earlier, is that like you have your master, you have your overseer of overseers, so he's in control of them, and then your overseers oversee the slaves. So they're divided into smaller groups. Great question. My other question is like, okay, if you're getting up and your buddy next to you doesn't hear the horn, aren't you getting them up too? Right? I mean, like, you would think. But also, could that slave profit from that person not getting up because now the focus is on them, not themselves, right? So, okay, so I just think this is interesting, like this idea of like Frederick Douglass recognizing the impact. We all understand the impact that slavery had on slaves, duh, but the impact that it has on slave masters, I think, is unique for us to see that. Mr. Sevier was rightly named. He was a cruel man. I have seen him whip a woman, causing the blood to run half an hour at the time, and this, too, in the midst of her crying children, pleading for their mother's release. That's unique because what do we already remember? Like, isn't that one of the reasons why they separate children from their parents, right? So this is the reason to separate, like, mother and child. I mean, they're children, so they're not going to do much, but had it switched sides and the child was being beaten, you could imagine what the mother would have done. He seemed to take pleasure in manifesting his fiendish barbarity. Added to his cruelty, he was a profane swearer. It was enough to chill the blood and stiffen the hair of an ordinary man to hear him talk. Scarce a sentence escaped him, but that was commenced or concluded by some horrid oath. What do you think this oath is? Like he is, like an oath is what? What is just like in the normal sense, what is an oath? A promise. So what is this horrible promise that he ends every sentence with? Well, he's already whipping him. He's in the middle of whipping him. I mean, yeah, that's what I would think, right? So that like, right? So he's already in the middle of whipping him. He's taking out all of his anger, even on women, right? And at the end of everything is like, if you don't do this, I will kill you, right? That's that horrible oath, that swearing. And I think we did in chapter 1, didn't we do like this, like positive, negative, like horrid is bad, like an oath is good, like to tie those two things together is interesting. The field was the place to witness his cruelty and profanity. His presence made it both the field of blood and of blasphemy. From the rising till the going down of the sun, he was cursing, raving, cutting, and slashing among the slaves in the field in the most frightful manner. His career was short. He died soon after I went to Colonel Lloyd's, and he died as he lived, uttering with his dying groans bitter curses and horrid oaths. His death was regarded by the slaves as the result of a merciful providence. What is mercy? To show mercy on somebody. What does that mean? To care, to what? To spare, to forgive. Do the people that receive mercy usually deserve the mercy? No. So yeah, I mean, so this is like forgiveness to someone or for someone that may not deserve it. What is a providence? What comes from a providence? Or who states the providence? Who does that providence come from? His death was regarded by the slaves as the result of a merciful providence. Close to the church? Yeah. So, the slaves felt the idea that like mercy was shown to them with Severe's death. It's so weird to call him Severe. Severe's place was filled by a Mr. Hopkins. He was a very different man. He was less cruel, less profane, and made less noise than Mr. Severe. His course was characterized by no extraordinary demonstrations of cruelty. He whipped, but seemed to take no pleasure in it. He was called by slaves a good overseer. Kind of like the idea of a kind master, right? Good, positive, overseer, negative. So, look at this question, like, what's ironic about that situation? So the irony is going from Mr. Severe to Mr. Hopkins. What's ironic about slavery with that change of hands? If on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, where was Mr. Severe? 11 or 12. Yep. So if we haven't heard about Mr. Hopkins yet, but if Mr. Hopkins was less severe or less cruel, less profane, made like less yelling and screaming, where is he on a scale of 1 to 10? Maybe 10. Yeah, I mean, less severe is just one step down, right? It's, yeah, so what's ironic about that?
They try to give the positive and the bad situation.
Trying to find light in the dark.
Yeah, trying to find light in the dark. Delana, what were you going to say?
No,
Something like that. So the slaves are happy, right? So what's ironic is this idea that the slaves are like at kind of, I mean, I don't want to say thankful, but recognize, right? Somebody that still whips them, but at least it's not as bad as him, right? So I'm going to put like the kinder overseer, like who still whips and beats them. And again, like what does this do for the audience? Notice that it's not, there's no emotion in it at all. He's just saying like this is what it is. So again, we're looking at like the freed men, white men in the North going like this is what it is. Like they're thankful for somebody that still beats them. That's crazy. All right, notice here we're looking at Douglas compares slaves' pursuit to the great house as analogous, like comparing it to like a politician seeking an office. So like a slave wants to get to the great house, a politician wants to get to some office. So let's go through this. We're going to read this one and then we'll be done for the day. The slaves selected to go to the great house farm for the monthly allowance for themselves and their fellow slaves were peculiarly enthusiastic. So when they got their monthly money, right? Not everybody could go to the great house because, like, we don't need slaves at the great house, right? The great house is like the big house the main house on the plantation. So we don't need all the slaves here. We just need a few of you. So those slaves would go collect the money, right, for everybody and then take it back to the slaves. While on their way, they would make the dense old woods for miles around reverberate with their wild songs, revealing at once the highest joy and the deepest sadness. So these are our slave songs that they are singing. They would compose and sing them as they went along. So they're just making this up as they go, consulting neither time nor tune. The thought that came up came out, if not in word and in the sound, and as frequently in the one as in the other. They would sometimes sing the most pathetic sentiment in the most rapturous tone. So pathetic sentiment would be like the sad part of their life. Rapturous tone, think about like those like happy, upbeat, like think about like your church songs that are fast and upbeat and make you clap and sing and like the high sounds rather than the low sounds. So they would sing about the bad parts of their life in those high sounds. When you listen to music, unless you're a Swiftie, you're listening first to like the melody. That's kind of what gets you in there, right? So when the slave masters hear the slaves coming to the great house, singing these upbeat songs that sound like upbeat songs, are they worried about the words? No, they're like, oh, they're happy. Look, they're so happy. It's amazing. And the most rapturous sentiments, so the things that they feel like would come across as like their love for God, their love for their faith, right? In the most pathetic tone. So that would be the low, slow. So if the slave masters heard them singing slower songs in a lower tone and be like, why are you singing such sad songs? They'd be like, no, we're singing about our love for God and for you and for all the great things. Right? So they're hiding their real feelings and intentions in the opposite speed and tone of their songs. Into all of their songs, they would manage to weave something of the great house farm. Especially would they do this when leaving home. They would then sing most exalting the following words. I am going away to the great house farm. Oh, yay, oh, yay. Okay, so what could literally the great house equals like the main house on the plantation? If it literally means the great house, what could it figuratively represent? What could the great house represent? They don't even have any opportunity to go to a good house. What could the great house figuratively, symbolically represent for them? No, that's literal. Figurative is like something abstract.
Is it like what it says here about politicians seeking office?
Okay, kind of. If the ultimate place that the politicians want to get to is a house, is like a piece in the office, like a place in the office, where ultimately are the slaves wanting to get to?
Freedom.
Okay, could be freedom. Do what? I don't think they ever have any dreams of being rich. I think freedom is their first control. What also about, most of them probably won't make it to freedom. They realize that. Oh, I just saw a light go off in Keyshawn's head. Look at that. It will more than likely, the great house, be heaven, right? So they're going to the great house, they're going to the great house, right? They know that they won't really make it to freedom. Their real hope is going to be for heaven. What time we got here? 16, right? All right, we are stopping there. We will finish up tomorrow. Do you want me to read with you tomorrow, or do you want to finish reading on your own?